Some stress or a little stress is necessary. It's why we're alive today. The problem is the amount of stress and the amount of things that are causing stress in our body has become overwhelming, nonstop, 24/7, and it's not supposed to be that way. The body's pretty smart. When it's under a lot of stress, it doesn't want to get pregnant and it tries to alter your cycles. Welcome to the Trusted Pharmacist, where you'll learn the truth about how the body works. Welcome back to the Trusted Pharmacist. I'm your host, Steve Hofford. And are you stressed? Are you really stressed to the point that you know it's affecting your health? And if that's you, which is like most of the patients that I see in the pharmacy, this podcast is for you. Our body needs some stress to survive. That's how we get through life. But when this stress goes on nonstop, every day, day after day, week after week, month after month, it will destroy your health and can lead to health conditions that you can't reverse. And we're going to talk about why that is so important, why stress really causes all the problems it does, but how it's time for you to make that change incrementally and do all those little things that can set you back up for better health. In all my years of functional medicine training, there's one thing that I've learned, and I've heard so many of the most valued and trusted practitioners that I've ever heard speak and lecture on, and they will tell you this all the time. If you don't address stress and you don't control cortisol, you can fix all of your other health things, hormones, cardiovascular issues, insulin resistance, and try to fix all those things. But if you don't address stress and control cortisol, you're wasting your time because it is the top of the food chain and making sure that your health is the best. Some stress or a little stress is necessary. It's why we're alive today. It's why we're the most dominant species. If we didn't know how to handle stress and overcome, we wouldn't be here today. The problem is the amount of stress and the amount of things that are causing stress in our body has become overwhelming, nonstop, 24/7, and it's not supposed to be that way. Stress is more than just being overwhelmed. Stress affects so many different processes in the body. And when you begin to understand how it can begin to poke little holes in your overall health, you realize if you don't look at addressing stress, you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble. Short bursts of stress are actually protective. They can actually help improve your focus, your energy, and survival. But it's long-term stress that doesn't go away every day that can initially make cortisol levels rise and increase our sympathetic tone, which is okay short-term, but if it doesn't ever get a break, then we run into problems where our body begins to compensate, and where we went from high cortisol, we go to low cortisol, and that can cause those problems too. And for your body to handle long-term stress, then what happens, we begin to burn through and deplete a lot of nutrients, which will go into things like magnesium, vitamin C, and so many minerals and other vitamins that are so critical for just our normal body processes. And this long-term stress can really cause havoc to where we just really don't have the right vitamins and nutrients we need just to live. And day after day of long-term stress can wreak havoc on not only our adrenals, but our gut, our thyroid, how our body makes its hormones, our immune system, how we make energy. But more importantly, it creates chronic inflammation that causes problems with all of our chronic diseases. It accelerates aging, makes you get as faster, older than what you should. And then ultimately, it's going to give a decreased quality of life because all of your body begins to fall apart. So let's take a deeper dive into short-term stress versus long-term stress. When you have a short-term stress episode, the body goes into fight or flight or survival, which is a good thing short-term. First of all, your body makes adrenaline. And this is good because it increases the amount of energy that your body needs to survive. It gets your body ready to fight and survive what's going on. It increases blood flow to your muscles. It raises your blood pressure. This causes a drop or an increase in the amount of blood sugar so that your muscles and your brain is energized. It raises your energy. It gets you going. You spike cortisol, which is this hormone that prepares the body to get ready to attack and do what it has to do. And that's what happens in short-term stress. It's an acute. It should be short-term. It goes away. And then all of a sudden, your adrenaline should go back down. Your cortisol should go back down. And you should return to like a normal balance where those should be normal. Problem is, our stress doesn't go away the way it should, and it stays on long-term. And then long-term high adrenaline and long-term high cortisol has some major problems. So if your stress is long-term, that means from sun up to sundown and it don't go long, this high cortisol can cause major problems for you. It can trigger anxiety, make you very antsy, nervous. It makes you have food cravings. It can make you gain weight, especially bad weight, which is that visceral weight in your abdominal area that increases inflammation. And with the high adrenaline, it also spikes your blood pressure, which can cause a whole host of cardiovascular issues. And then it also raises your cholesterol levels. So this high blood sugar, high cholesterol, high blood pressure combination is not good because this cortisol never goes down and these just continue to happen, which can set you up for failure in terms of long-term health consequences. But here's where the problem comes. If you go day after day, week after week, month after month with high cortisol, the body begins to adjust. It says, look, we've got to take this person out of this stressful situation and calm them down. And the way that it actually does that is it can then begin to lower cortisol levels. So even though you need high cortisol to get through the day, your body says, let's calm this down. And then we see things like depression, excessive fatigue, problems in terms of brain fog, because the brain just doesn't and cannot work as well. And when your cortisol becomes suppressed, your immune system begins to drop. You end up getting sick all the time. And even worse, this can lead to autoimmune issues because the immune system is not working the way it should. And now you've really got a problem where your long-term cortisol, where it was high, is now low. And this low everyday cortisol, you end up seeing something that I like to see, somebody that's wired and tired, and you just can't get through your day. So how do you find out where you're at in this chronic stress spectrum? And the best way to do that is a 4-point salivary cortisol. And what that means is you get up in the morning and you do a spit within the first 30 minutes of getting out of bed. You spit again, then around lunch, spit again, then around supper time, and then you do a final spit in the evening. And this creates a natural curve that should look like a rise in the morning and it begin to fall throughout the day. And when you go to bed at night, you should see it drop. So what we're looking for is this natural curve on an average day of testing. And salivary testing has been shown by far in the literature to be the best way to check this. And so what happens is early on, like we talked about, when you're having a lot of chronic stress, but the body's keeping up, you'll see this cortisol can be high throughout the whole entire day. Every one of these levels are above normal, whether it be in the morning, whether it be at noon, at lunch, or supper. Your levels are high the whole entire day. And this says, hey, the body's just trying to get you through this survival mode. But over time, if your stress doesn't go away or you don't work on ways to lower it, what we begin to see is when you get up in the morning versus a good, nice cortisol spike to get you out of bed, get you going for the day, you don't make quite as much cortisol. And there's actually a super concentrated cortisol test called a cortisol awakening response. And what we have found is patients who wake up in the morning and they don't make enough cortisol to get them up in the morning and get them going, it's like starting the day on a half take and they can't get through the day. And when your cortisol awakening response is low, this is a great indication that you're past that initial high cortisol period and you're in a chronic stress state and you really have to do things to start protecting and looking out for your adrenals. Because if you start up the day with a half a take, there's no way you're going to get through the whole day, especially if you haven't done the things to reduce your stress. So along with making a lot of adrenaline and making a lot of cortisol, your body burns through vitamins and nutrients. And sadly, so many people are already low in vitamins and nutrients because of bad diet. Now, all of a sudden, you put you in a state where you need more than you normally need, and we run into all kinds of problems. The first big thing is something we're low in magnesium. Your body uses massive amounts of magnesium in this process, and this can lead to problems like anxiety, insomnia, and this can also cause you to have high blood pressure when your magnesium's low. Next is your B vitamins. Your B vitamins are needed for all these metabolic processes and all these enzymes to make your neurotransmitters. And it's very common to see people low in B3 and B6, and this causes problems with energy. In addition, poor neurotransmitter production, which leads to all the mood issues that happen during high cortisol periods. Next is vitamin C. Your vitamin C is so necessary in terms of your adrenal function, and your body uses so much vitamin C during periods of high stress. And if you're not supplementing and doing this during your period of high stress, I can promise you your vitamin C will be low. And this is a master antioxidant to keep our body healthy, especially during times of stress. Remember how we talked about chronic stress gives a problem in terms of low cortisol, which can cause immune issues and autoimmune issues? What's even worse, your body burns through a ton of zinc. And zinc is critical for proper immune response and making sure your immune system stays healthy. So this combination of super low cortisol after periods of high stress, along with low zinc, and there's no wonder our immune system can't function to help us fight infections and actually prevent autoimmune conditions. Next is iron. Iron tends to go low during periods of high stress. And one of the issues with this is if you're low in iron, you don't make enough red blood cells, you run a low-grade anemia, and if your body can't carry your oxygen and your nutrients on your red blood cells, you're going to be tired, run down, and fatigued. And even worse, iron is needed to make sure that your thyroid gland produces the right amount of T3 from T4. So if you're already tired, run down, and sluggish because of an excessive amount of cortisol for a long term, now your low iron can cause further problems. And lastly, many people with chronic stress have low vitamin D. And vitamin D only exacerbates the problems that happen with high cortisol. Many people already have bone loss and bone resorption during periods of high cortisol because cortisol is something that's catabolic. It breaks things down. So if you have high cortisol and you're low in D, you're going to have bone problems. Secondly, your vitamin D is important in terms of your immune system, but more importantly, vitamin D levels are needed to maintain good mood. And during high periods of stress, we already have mood issues, so low vitamin D only makes this worse. So we talked about all the things with high cortisol and high adrenaline, but what about all the other effects that stress has on the body? One, and the most important, is your gut. Cortisol and high stress will destroy your gut. It causes leaky gut, where parts of the materials in your gut go throughout the body, and this triggers a low-grade inflammation. More importantly, it goes to the brain and creates inflammation there, which leads to a whole host of immune issues. In addition, it kills off your good gut bacteria, which can lead to problems like dysbiosis, which causes all types of digestion issues. And finally, this low-grade inflammation that can occur can trigger things like IBS and other gut conditions, because when you're under periods of high stress, your gut is the most effective. And when your gut's not healthy, you're going to really struggle with overall health. Next, high stress and cortisol can affect your thyroid. Most importantly, it signals the body to tamp down the thyroid because the body's already over here trying to survive. And thyroid is that driver of metabolism. So it tries to calm some of the metabolism and other issues by calming your thyroid. You don't produce as much of the active T3 as you're supposed to. It suppresses thyroid function. And this just further drives the fatigue and tiredness that can occur, especially if you've had long-term chronic stress. What about chronic stress on hormones? Guess what? Your body only has so many building blocks to make its sex hormones, things like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA. And when it's stuck making cortisol, one of the biggest hormones that I see a problem with is your body doesn't make enough of the progesterone, which so many of our female patients already struggle with low progesterone. So if you're under periods of high stress and then you all of a sudden now need progesterone to balance out estrogen, you typically see estrogen dominance. So stress and cortisol makes that worse. The next thing is, in a lot of guys, I see high cortisol cause a problem with low testosterone. And what guy nowadays, we see so many in their 30s and 40s with low testosterone, which we used to never see that because of this high cortisol drains those building blocks of making the hormones. Especially in women, I see it exacerbating things like PCOS. I see it also causing infertility issues because the body's pretty smart. When it's under a lot of stress, it doesn't want to get pregnant and it tries to alter your cycles. And so it's the body's protective mechanism during high periods of stress to keep you from getting pregnant. But this causes a lot of problems because people who want to get pregnant, if you don't work on that stress, it can cause infertility issues. And finally, the body isn't worried about sex drive and libido and procreating during periods of stress. So we typically see low libido, low sex drive during periods of high stress. And this is a protective mechanism because the body thinks you're trying to run from a tiger and not really have any of those type sexual desires. So keep that in mind if you're struggling with hormone issues. Stress can be a big cause. And finally, the last two things we talked about, it has a tremendous effect in terms of the immune system, your body's ability to fight infections, preventing autoimmune conditions, and even warding off cancer. When our body's under periods of high stress, the immune system gets dysfunctional. And finally, in the brain, we begin to see all type of neurotransmitters inflammation, neurotransmitter issues, inflammation, and other problems that lead to mood issues, anxiety, depression, brain fog, where you just really have a hard time getting through your day. So now you've heard all the issues, you've heard about the health consequences, we talked about how to test and all the other host of problems that happen in the body when you're under high stress and cortisol. And if you ignore those, you're setting yourself up for failure. So before you get too far down the road, let's work on fixing these things. And here's a great plan to work on step by step how to get your cortisol under control, get your adrenals fixed, and take care of yourself. From what I've learned through the years, if you've had periods of high stress, fixing the adrenals can take anywhere from 6 months to a year. So this isn't a quick fix, but you got to start somewhere. And I tell a lot of patients, look, we didn't wreck our adrenals overnight and we're not going to fix them overnight, but here are some steps and approaches you can take that can help support your adrenals. And especially women who are in perimenopause and menopause, you want to have healthy adrenals as you're going through these years, because if you don't, you're going to have problems. It's your adrenal glands that are making all this cortisol that also have to pick up the slack for your sex hormones. And if your adrenals are healthy going into perimenopause and menopause, you're going to have a nice, smooth transition. But if your adrenals are in a health crisis and your body's in a wreck when you go into perimenopause and menopause, you're going to really struggle through these transition years, and you're going to wish you had fixed this earlier, so it's not too late to start it now. So let's lower cortisol and stress naturally with some lifestyle things. First and foremost is sleep hygiene. You have to be getting good sleep, because if you don't, if you have a bad night's sleep, believe it or not, the next day you'll just naturally run high cortisol levels, which trigger a whole host of problems. Make sure you're sleeping in a good dark room, a good cold room. Maybe consider a grounding mat. Also, making sure you're limiting blue light before you go to sleep, and make sure that light in that room is blacked out when you go to bed at night. Don't sit in bed and watch TV. Do those things in bed you should only be doing, which is sleep, and take care of yourself so you can minimize those cortisol levels, and sleep is not a cost. Work on getting normal circadian rhythms, and that means getting up in the morning early when the sun comes up and getting about 30 minutes to an hour of good morning sunlight in your eyes. If you have a job for some reason that you can't get out and see the sun, then what you need to do is get in front of like one of these type of specialty lights that mimics the sunlight to make that natural cortisol rise the way it should to start in the morning, so it falls throughout the day. Next is daily movement and exercise. Movement is the key to normalizing those circadian rhythms and keeping things normal. And you need to keep in mind, you don't have to do crazy physical exercise, because if somebody's at that point we talked about where you've done long-term chronic stress and you try to push your body harder than it should, you're only going to make your adrenals more sick. So being smart, trying to do some weight training 3 to 4 times a week, getting some daily good aerobic activity. But if you know your body's under a lot of stress and you're already fatigued and run down, you're not going to exercise yourself out of it, and you're only going to cause more problems by doing so. And finally, work on natural stress reduction techniques. Those are things like breath work, meditation, yoga, prayer. So work those things into your daily routine, because these have been some of the great things, better than any drug you can, to normalize cortisol levels naturally and set you up for success. Once you've done lifestyle things, now let's work on doing some nutritional vitamin support products. So first is a good magnesium. I would recommend something like magnesium glycinate or magnesium threonate, or good absorbable forms of magnesium that get in your system and work well. Next is either a B complex vitamin or a good multivitamin that's got a good B complex, especially with adequate amounts of pantothenic acid and activated B vitamins like B12 and folate, so that your body can make the neurotransmitters it needs and have adequate amounts, because you're blowing through these during periods of high stress. Next, to support the adrenals and your immune system, you need adequate amounts of vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc, so that these can stay adequate, because under periods of high stress, as we talked about earlier, your body will deplete these, and being low on these only makes all those cortisol issues worse. And finally, look at things like adaptogens. These are things that modulate the immune system. So if your cortisol's too high, it can bring it down. And if your cortisol's too low, it can bring it up. Things like ashwagandha, rhodiola, holy basil, ginseng. These are just some of the many adaptogens that are out there that you can look at. Certain adaptogens can be better at certain times of the day. Like I really like to do rhodiola during the day, especially if you're in that part where you've had long-term high stress and your cortisol levels are actually suppressed. It can help with that when you're wired and tired, taken during the day to help with energy. And then something like ashwagandha to do at night, because it is very calming. It actually can help support the thyroid gland, but it actually can help you get better rest at night, but help keep your cortisol levels in check. And 2 other unique supplements that can help with periods of high cortisol during stress. One is something called phosphatidylserine. If you see that your cortisol levels are high throughout the day, nonstop, or especially at night when you go to sleep, phosphatidylserine is great to help calm and suppress those high cortisol levels. And lastly, when we typically see high stress and high cortisol, we see a wrecked gut with a poor microbiome. So taking a good, high quality probiotic with at least 20 billion or more CFUs is what I recommend to make sure that you have good, healthy gut function. And was mentioned earlier, it can take 6 months to a year to get all of your adrenals back working properly. So it's probably worthwhile once you start some lifestyle, nutrients, and supplements to make sure that you do some repeat your cortisol testing about every 3 or 6 months. In addition, as we talked about, vitamins and nutrients are depleted during this periods of high stress. So you can ask your doctor to run things like a vitamin D test, RBC magnesium, vitamin B12, ferritin for iron, and even zinc. We didn't even talk about diet, but one of the things that I can stress to make sure that you want to keep your cortisol in check is keeping a good, healthy diet. Because even if you eat a greatest diet in the world, during periods of high stress, you're going to run blood sugars. So if you eat a diet full of high glycemic foods and then you don't control that way, you're just adding to that stress. So it's important to try to eat like a low glycemic, more of a Mediterranean diet when you're under periods of high stress so that you're not further causing problems by eating a bad diet. And one of the key measures you can make sure to find out that you're eating a good diet and keeping your blood sugars in check is either doing a fasting insulin or checking a hemoglobin A1C. And if you're looking to read a little more about cortisol and your adrenals, here's a couple of my suggested books. One of those is by Dr. James Wilson, which is called Adrenal Fatigue, the 21st Century Stress Syndrome. The Adrenal Transformation Protocol by Dr. Isabella Wentz. And Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Dr. Robert Sapolsky. So if you've had periods of high stress and you know it, but on the outside, it's exposing itself in terms of mood issues, you're anxious, you're stressed all the time. You just keep gaining weight no matter how good you eat, no matter what else you do. Your thyroid's sluggish, no matter having the best care and taking thyroid medications. You have problems with high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high blood sugars, and you're not doing anything to take care of these, and you know you're under stress. It's time to take advantage of the knowledge in this podcast and work on lowering your cortisol levels so you can set yourself up for health success and not failure, because long-term stress will kill you over time by all the things that we talked about that set you up for bad paths in your future. So if you're like me, I know a lot of people who have stress. So make sure you share this podcast with them because they need to know the detriments of having high stress and cortisol and doing nothing about it. And if you like this, be sure to give it a thumbs up. So now that you have the answers, stop stressing out about your stress and anxiety and do something about it. Until the next time, thanks so much for joining me on the Trusted Pharmacist podcast. Wishing you lots of health and happiness.